towards scouting, but isn't quite at the same level of dedication that the Shockwave folks have.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Keith.
Can I started my first in 2010, my first season as a freshman in high school. And yeah, been doing it since. So also pretty heavily involved in like robot design and strategy during the competition. So it's pretty difficult to pick a good third robot. So
Something we're definitely still working on. Yes.
Anyway.
All right, so now that we know everyone on the panel, is there any questions anyone had? Otherwise, I have a few we can dive into before we're all rolling, but please, if anyone's got specific questions.
I saw a hand here first.
What would you consider good questions to ask during hit scouting?
During hit scouting?
Or hit scouting?
Okay, like going around talking to people. Sean, do you want to take it?
So it completely depends on the game. What we like to do is, as soon as we get the game and kind of have established our robot design, we like to think about what our robot has done, what we thought about other teams do. So I'm going to take 2019 as an example, if that's okay. Breaking it up into autonomous and saying, like, what do you do in auto? Just like, what do you do? Generally, what's your path? Do you place a panel? Where do you place it? Do you place cargo? Where do you place it? Where do you start? So you can kind of establish auto. Going through tele-up, what's your most desired play to make? Right? What does your robot do most often every time? What's your plan? What does your robot do? How much do you think it could score? How long does it take you to do certain actions, and where can you place objects? And then going into endgame, really, where do you finish in endgame, such as finishing on the third level of the hat, the second or the first? How long does it take you to get there about? Anything important we need to know about your team, like changes in design. Really, it just depends on what you want to get out of the team at the time.
And like to kind of jump off of that, even if you have phenomenal scouters with a ton of data collection, you still might not get a full representation for the robot. Depending on the game, and I think that's why we were kind of looking at 2018, is that there's some robots that were great at scale and great at switch, but they might have never done the switch because they were so busy on the scale every single match. So your data might show this robot has never done switch, they probably can't do it, and so just need the numbers a little bit too hard to know. So between that as well as like the auto or semi-auto, depending.
That's a good point from last year.
It's good to know what options are available. Because a team might not always be running all their options. Maybe they have a certain auto path that they tend to use a lot just because it's really robust, or just because strategy-wise they've always been put in matches where they've had to use it back-to-back, and they might have something that is super compatible with one of yours. So that's another good thing to kind of check out.
That's why we emphasize pre-scouting, because it gives you a picture of what they've done before an event, because that event you're at with them now, they might not be able to do any of that stuff depending on how their match schedules roll. And then interviewing teams is so important. So yeah, having a good list of questions when you come to an event, I highly recommend. It will just help you so much.
Yeah, I think they've kind of covered it. I think that there are a lot of teams, personally, I think ask too many questions and then they don't honestly use most of that data. So I just think maybe consider the Venn diagram of things maybe that a person you're asking at the pit would know, things that are more difficult to get through data, and things that you actually are going to possibly use. And between those three, it's really a fairly small set of questions for most people, and as I said, it'll depend on your strategy and what you're trying to do.
I think that's a great point. There are a lot of teams that just come with a template and they won't even look at you. They'll just
How many wheels do you have?
Yeah, that's like, you can see on my robot how many wheels. So sometimes but those are baby steps, right? Like even if you come with just that basic sheet, that's still helpful. But know that you can grow off of that and make it more focused, specific.
Even as our data collection improved, we've actually stopped asking a lot of the how many things can you score, because in a lot of cases we already know from our data, and it's really it's a waste of their time, it's a waste of our time to be asking that and storing that information. And we've actually added a lot more questions regarding organization and team stuff,
Team
things
dynamics.
that you can't see on the field. Yeah, team dynamics. Like, was mentioned, like, how many batteries do you have? We had issues at Worlds before where the team only had 2 batteries, and that's fine for qualification matches, but elimination is a big deal. And if you don't have the battery resources to support that team, that actually is a factor in selection. Some things that we ask as well is about, team preparedness. If something breaks, do you have spare parts? Do you, how long does it take you to repair something on your robot or replace something on your robot, which is not something you can see on the field.
I think just one other example of something that could be valuable that we haven't, I don't think asked that much, but maybe we will, is like just what kind of things your team is most confident and comfortable doing. That's another thing, some teams might not always get to do the thing on the field that they want to, and if you play a match with someone, I hope you always ask that anyway, because in forming a strategy, you want to take into account what teams are best at and want to do, but for teams that you don't play a match with,
Yeah, that was what I was going to add. It's really critical to understand where each team you're allied with is coming from, and making sure that they feel like they're informing the entire alliance's play style. Like, you might think that the your robot and the robot you're playing with are going to be the offense robots, and the third robot's going to be the defense robot, but they're just not going to play very good defense if they do not want to play defense. At the end of the day, that's how it's going to work. And so, understanding that before you ask them to do something they don't want to do can kind of make it so it works better, right? If you color the entire alliance in, well, we're going to force you to play defense, it's not going to be a great time.
Even if you have data about how great their wheels are, because if they don't want to play it, they don't want to play it.
Any other questions?
So if it's the second round and your team hasn't been picked yet, and you're obviously not going to be a captain, do you think it's a good idea to ever say no if your robot isn't broken? And like, when would you say no to be selected by another team?
you're not going to be a captain.
I think historically there's only been like really one accidental no, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a situation where you would say, I mean, if you're really broken and you're trying to do the nice thing and save the alliance and say, no, yeah, that's really cool and gracious and professional and all that.
People will remember that.
Yeah, but I think that, unless there's a really hard reason for you to say no, like, just jump on and see where it goes, right?
I will preface that sometimes I know at Worlds this last year we had an issue with the team that picked us really had misinformed data about what our robot could do, and that was a hurdle we had to get through where they didn't even know we could going. We're like, why did you
And they
pick
thought we
us?
could do the rocket.
And they thought we could do the rocket. We were a low bot. We just did. So yeah, things like that will happen too. Like, you'll say yes, expecting them to have this idea about you, right? Because they took the time to like have your name on their list, that they would know what your robot's capable of doing. And I want to just preface that's not always the case. So be prepared for that as well, because it happens to big teams like us. But we made it work. We had to adjust our strategy a little bit, but we had a confident speaker with all our data, and he was able to convince him to pick our third pick robot to complement what we now had to kind of adjust for, since they didn't have an informed opinion of what our robot
And
could do.
they had said no to another alliance to be an alliance captain.
Yes, yeah. They weren't prepared for it, yeah.
Curious, is there a little more background behind your question, like something you had in mind? Or?
Well, just I know there were some teams that like we thought might pick us in the last competition that we just really weren't compatible with, and like I don't know, just whether it was worth it to try to make it work.
Yeah, I think if you're not in a picking position, and if you say no, you're out of the competition, is that what you're saying? My opinion is always that if you're not in a picking position, you play the hand you're dealt, right? We've been in situations where we're picking, we've been in situations where we're getting picked. And even if we're not super happy with the alliance, I think the shift has to be very quick to how do we make this work. Even during qualification matches, it's always the same thing. You don't know your hand's going to be dealt, and you have to come from a optimistic point of view and start looking at the data, start looking at the strategies, and start thinking about how do we play this.
Yeah.
Give it your all.
I think in the extremely rare situation, really, you're at a first robotics competition. Like what it's about is gaining experiences, right? Gaining inspiration and excitement and learning for all of the people on the team. And if the people on the team don't want to be in that situation, they don't want to have that experience with that team, like they just know that it's going to be terrible for them, then as a team you could decide, okay, now we're just going to step back and not do that if that's the case. But I've honestly never heard of that happening. So it certainly would be rare.
And then just have fun, right?
Yeah, it's all about fun. So, you know, if you can look on the bright side and just do your best with what you get, it could be a good learning experience out of it.
And it's more driver practice.
That one, yeah, you remember, we got 2 district events you got to go to before you get district champs, so take advantage of whatever you get. Any more questions? All right, we can dive into juicy.
I had
Go for it.
a note, yeah, I definitely want to dive into
Okay.
it. Maybe this will be covered in
Okay.
this. But when you guys mentioned your communication with the strategy captain out on the field, one thing that we do that I wanted to recommend to everyone here is we, when we create our pick lists, we create keep notes that are lists on an app called Google Keep that essentially the person out on the field can see them, and the people in the stands can also see the list, the exact same list live. And so we actually assign a person in the stands to check off the teams as they're picked. And that way the person out on the field already has a pared down list of only who's available. And so that way any communication about who to pick is only going to be relevant.
That's very important.
We do a similar thing where we use Google spreadsheet, and so we also have people in the stands helping cross things off.
Of the signed person. And it does, it takes off pressure of the person out on the field, you're right. Because sometimes it's hard to keep track of like who got crossed off, right? If you're really focused on like, oh crap, my first pick got taken, now I'm like really focused on who I'm gonna pick next and how that changes my strategy, all the while people are still going around and picking their next team members, it's nice to have that backup. Someone's already crossed them off for you on your list.
Or I've seen that, you know, someone within the top 8 gets invited, and then someone crosses off the list and they say no, and they're like, no, I just crossed it.
How did back?
Anything else?
How you guys can work with a big group so they have the right information when scout comes? Because I think sometimes scout comes and someone that doesn't know anything about the role starts asking questions.
So in terms of like representation.
I would love to touch on this one, because I will let Bryce and Keith take it first though, but I will add my opinion to it.
It's hard. But honestly, our like first line of defense is that the pit crew is a chosen position. It's selected based on merit, and so the people that make it into the pit crew tend to know about the robot. We also have like a pit bouncer assigned, and it's a difficult job, and it doesn't always really work. Like, I mean, not really to bounce other teams, but just to keep people from just like our team loitering in the pit when there's a very limited amount of space. And they also are kind of in charge of when another team comes with questions, they're supposed to be the first person to greet them. People have also called them pit greeters. That's a little bit more polite. But you know, we're mean.
I would say that we do a good job of selecting people who are educated about the robot. And we keep our crew pretty small. So the people who are doing that are almost driving, basically, in terms of knowledge.
Yeah.
The driving is around quite a bit, though. The greeter will direct the person typically to the most educated for that topic.
We definitely can do a better job of additionally educating the people in the pits about like average performances of the robot, because they don't always like see all the matches, they don't have the data, and just in general we don't do a great job of proliferating the data that we have to the places it needs to be, but you know, we do our best.
Also need to train them for chairmen as well, because chairmen will be struck by, and if your chairman's team presents this very holistic image of your team where everyone knows all this information, and then your people on your kids don't, that can damage your chances of winning.
Yeah. Sean, you've interacted with a lot of teams and seen what they've done. I'd love to hear your opinions on this too.
So really, when you interact with a team, 50% of the time, it's a person who kind of has very limited knowledge, or they've worked on a specific system and they can tell you, pages and pages of information on that, but they never really got to interact with another system. The way I see it is a lot of the time, some of the questions we ask, some of the questions can be answered by having, a nice and in-depth look at their robot. If you have a chance, sometimes it's, shrouded in the back of their pit, but being able to kind of look at the robot and ask interesting questions that you see about it can be one way to start getting some information. Another way, just to be able to be a little bit more knowledgeable about your team, is you can have a piece of paper. I've seen some teams have a piece of paper with just key bullet points about what their robot does, kind of what their aim is towards people who want to study.
That's a great point. Yeah, we used to have a business card each year for our robot that would just say robot abilities on it. Don't know. I don't think we did last year. We'll see if I come back. It's kind of nice.
So, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about what happens after the selection. Because as you're playing elimination rounds, right, strategy is decided for that alliance, right? And you don't know exactly how the others are playing, because if you're moving forward and going to semifinals and finals, you're gonna face different groups, right? How much do you do in terms of collecting data for elimination rounds?
One of the areas that we're really trying hard to develop on our team is, you can see we've got a really advanced strategy system, but it's really hard to convince your stand scouters to scout other teams in playoff matches. When your team's coming up to play, everyone wants to stop what they're doing and watch your team. You made it to playoffs. So that's something we try to do. I would say that we're working on it, but it's good, and we still collect that data. We have a scaled down group of students, maybe a mentor too, giving us that data to pitch strategy or directly to the drive team, so that they know coming up, if we win this bracket in playoffs, and we're going to go up against either A or B, whoever wins the other bracket, this is what we need to expect. And I'd say it's really hard at Worlds because the turnaround time is insane. And it's hard at district championships too, but we tend to know the teams a lot better that are there. So it's a little easier on the local level because you already have 2 events worth of scouting data you can bring with you to district champs. And more than likely, a good portion of those teams in playoffs at district championships you'll have already scouted for prior events. So it's in Worlds, it's really hard. We're still working on that. Sean, you want to add anything?
Small thing.
Yeah.
It's really knowing, if you know what the possible strategies are, you kind of classify what an opposing alliance can do, classify what their strategy is, what their different robot roles, and if you can start categorizing the opposing alliances, even in playoffs, you can kind of get a general idea of what they're doing.
I think we typically try to grab at least the commander and whoever's working on strategy and watch the other quarterfinals. Because typically, hopefully, the robot is in good enough condition that the pick room and the other practice members can maintain the robot, do everything that's needed there, and then we can get the commander to look at the other matches. We don't do any type of formal data collection, but we do try to think about what we would need to do if we were playing that alliance, and talk about defense strategies against them that seem to be working or not working.
Yeah.
I don't like commander. Is that drive coach for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a student drive coach.
Drive coach, so we often call him commander or captain, drive captain.
Give them a little Star Trek.
Yeah, that would be great.
But yeah,
Especially for the
basically the short answer to your question is that we don't. But we like Keith said, there's things that we do, and we try to be prepared for the next thing coming up, but it's definitely not very formal. We, as a team, for strategy and for many other reasons, we review the video footage of every match we play with the drive team during quals and playoffs, and we try to queue in the whole alliance drive teams, which is a little hard to organize, especially with the time crunch, but we still try to do it for playoffs. and make strategic adjustments as necessary. We don't do anything like that for other alliances matches, but we do, like you said, try to at least have a few people with strategy minds turned on watching those matches, thinking, what would we do? You know, and yeah, it's kind of funny. There have been times where we came up with something for another alliance, and then we got knocked out. So then we see the other team that beat us go up against them, and we think, man, they could just do this one weird trick, right? That doctors don't want you to know. And we'll actually go to the drive team and be like, hey, so have you noticed that they always do this one exact spot where there's this super effective choke point that no one's using? How come the defense spot isn't over there? And sometimes they use it, sometimes they don't, but it's kind of fun.
It definitely works out at Worlds level. PNW alliances, if you make it to Worlds, a lot of the PNW teams, whether they're in your division or not, are like a big family. They'll come over and lend you batteries or strategic data a lot of the time, which is awesome. So I always love it when teams can share that, just be, gracious enough to be like, hey, we got knocked out, but we want to see you go for it too. So here's a little info from our work. Any other questions, and I'll move on to some of our topics.
I think,
Oh, one back there.
So, how do you guys like suction pick this around the goals? Like this year, I know most of the games was a good cycling alliance, I mean, there's another cycle and then choose a defense spot. So do you have separate pick lists, or do you break it all in one large pick list?
Yeah, it's a great question that I was thinking of asking them during that presentation.
Yeah.
But yeah, for us, we definitely, essentially, like on the awesome little sheet over here that tells you how they make the pick list, we essentially, where they say adjust weights, we'll come up with two sets of weights. One for a first round pick, one for a second round pick. And then after that, every step is essentially doubled. But the first round pick is a lot shorter list, so it's easy to curate. But that's basically how I do that.
Yeah, it kind of showed up on Chief Delphi, kind of close to the top a while back. But we typically make a choose your own adventure sort of thing. Where, absolutely, depending on the different strategies. So a big one is in terms of the possible strategies, is where we lay out, and it's a little overwhelming, I have to admit, going through and figuring this out, because it's all a bunch of trade-offs. For every strategy you pick, up to a certain point, that strategy no longer is viable because the quality of robots isn't there to execute that strategy. Where in some cases, I'm going to pick on the scale bots again, but with my team, scale bots, at a certain point, switch bots become more effective. Even last year, rocket bots versus low bots, if you're looking at cycling and things like that, there's a trade-off where, maybe necessarily you don't want to do a rocket bot, maybe you want to do a low bot, maybe you want to analyze it a little bit differently, but there's a whole bunch around that. So we typically try to lay out these different strategies and looking and say, okay, this is one we want to try with, and then from there we start looking and say, okay, if we can get these robots, then what would be a great second pick, third pick to go with these robots.
Sometimes it's even overwhelming because they have the if with the list of
You get a big tree, that's what.
Sometimes it gets a little intense.
Yeah, it just depends on the game, but you're right, last year was very difficult because there was definitely a saturation point at which you wanted to kind of change your strategy for the next best robot at that other specialized thing.
Yeah, I think last year for us was a little
It's hard
easier to make the list because, like you said, you're picking another cycler. So in terms of creating that list was pretty easy. You just, in terms of game elements, who's cycling. And then in terms of the defensive robot, then it's just look at information in terms of, we track a lot of stuff in terms of how did someone's score get impacted while under defense and who was playing defense and stuff like that. So we have a lot of that metrics. And we have a lot of subjective data in terms of who's good defenders, and we can kind of sort that list. It's really trickier, I think, when we have games that have options that you can take very, very dramatic different strategies, and that's when we end up with the, many, many different tiers or branches and forks where if we can get these, then we go this route. If we can't get these, then we have to go this other route and put it all together. It's all a matter of alliance optimization.
So is that all end up in that Excel sheet that goes out on the field essentially where?
Many tabs.
Yeah, so they'll
Maybe
actually follow this logic tree to get
Yeah,
this.
we'll make cutoffs and say, if you
After
can
this
get
point,
someone within
change the
here,
strategy.
go this strategy, otherwise you have to switch to this other strategy, otherwise it's not gonna work.
That's pretty awesome.
There's one back there, I can't see from this, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, there you are, oh, sorry about that, go ahead.
What are some things you can do to make sure that your starters and stands feel relevant to focus to the people?
Ah, yes, this is a big pet peeve of mine.
Can I?
Oh, can I, because
Okay.
when we were developing the strategy team for Shockwave, again, like, you know, we started with a really small group of kids, and then slowly the team got bigger, we could put more resources to scouting and strategy. It was really hard to motivate people that are stuck in the stands to sit there just scouting matches, because some people don't like doing that. It's just recording data essentially at the basic level, and some kids love it. And it's a struggle every year. I've actually, when I go to Worlds, I try and interview some of the bigger teams and ask them how they deal with, what do we call it? We call it like a strategy lethargy or something like that, you know? It's basically you kind of get burned out. You want to be there for the team and collect the data, you know, accurately so that your team can use it. I'd say a lot of the best teams, how they do it is they integrate strategy to every level of their team. They make it such an important thing that the coaches, the mentors, the lead students are always talking about how important that role is, because if that data is wrong, it gets filtered down eventually to the drive team and we lose matches. So having everyone on board and excited about strategy, just to give them the confidence that what they're doing is really important, it makes a huge difference instead of just, God, they just stuck me in the stands because I didn't make, you know, drive team this year, you know? No, their role is important and it's utilized every single match. And if you can create that culture in your team, it's gonna take you so far. So, yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And that's actually something where I think our team can really improve a lot. We've actually done better sometimes in past years where we have a few students that are really excited about it and get the data pushed out to different parts of the team. But we use the data where it's really important to use and also really convenient to use, to be honest. And trying to get data from the previous match, from the scouts, through any analysis to somebody to deliver to the drive team for the next match, it's just an incredibly difficult system to design and run, and so we don't always have it. But another thing that we do in the absence of that, because we know that that's like the ideal, is that every single match you're using all of your data and you're basically getting, that's how you get the most out of the data, which your team should always want to do anyway. And that helps motivate the scouts because they see it getting used all the time. But in absence of that, we always essentially try to have something that can help scouts be invested in what's happening on the field, besides just to write down numbers. So like last year we had like a betting ring going on, where basically where our lead scout guy was named Schiller. He was a really awesome student. He was a real character. And he had Schiller bucks that you could win. And whoever had the most Schiller bucks at the end of the competition could choose for prizes. It was pretty awesome. He was impressive. So yeah, I recommend, you know, setting up things to try and make it fun and also are further connected to what's on the field because it helps keep people also engaged and awake and doing a good job of getting data. Because all this validation we're talking about that is awesome about having data, you can't really, it's not that useful if your validation data isn't like accurate. So yeah, it definitely, it's difficult. It's one of the harder parts of it.
I love that you actually talk about that. I really want Schiller bugs now, but I think there's a big difference in my mind between how do you make a team appreciate strategy and scouting versus how do you make it fun. And I think that, you know, we do a good job of making our team appreciate it, but not necessarily the fun aspects. That's really cool. And you know, I think Sarah touched on one of the words that I think are very important is culture. It's something that you have to build within your team over time, and you have to maintain it. It's really easy to slip and fall to a situation where your team no longer likes to scout and doesn't see the value in it. So we beat it to death. We talk about it all the time. We emphasize it all the time. We talk about where it's being used and how it's being used and how important it is, because in my opinion it is. I consider strategy and scouting as important as anything else on the team. When we're doing our strategy analysis at the beginning of the season, if you don't put enough effort and time and resources into that, you are not going to have a good season. You are potentially not going to design the right robot, the right solution, your priorities are going to be all messed up, and you're going to have a really rough season trying to catch up. We invest a tremendous amount of time and energy into strategy and scouting because we see the value in it. Like Sarah touched on, we have our robot programming group, and then we have our strategy programming group, which literally is a group running year-round, just like the other groups, that is working on how do we improve our strategy systems, how do we improve our app, how do we improve our data collection, how do we improve our data representation and distribution, how do we improve our alliance selection stuff, where it used to be that we had all this data and then we had trouble on the back end, now actually sorting data and representing and adjusting weights. So last year we put a bunch of effort into making a system just for that, in terms of creating these lists and exporting to an Excel sheet where we can do the sorting and all that. Investment saves time and it gets people more interested. They see that we really, really care about it. So that's why personally I'm very, very passionate about strategy, because it has such a huge impact on the season. You can have the best robot in the world. If you don't have good strategy, you're not going to win matches, and you're not going to have a good alliance, and you're not going to do well.
Sean, I'd really like your opinion on this. Being a student on our team, actually, to talk about this before we move on to another question.
I view strategy as the most important thing I do in the event. The majority of it. When you actually get to use strategy to influence and change a match, and you have people see, the influence it creates, you actually take people, because we try and have a culture on our team where a lot of people get interested in matches, and they look at the match schedule, and just by knowing about all the different robots, they say, this match looks dicey, or I don't know what's going to happen. By being able to take that and change it into a win, or being able to take a loss that people assume is a loss and change it to a win, pure just power of understanding the match, of utilizing all of your resources to 100%, that just amazes me that it can happen, and I think that just cultivates the culture.
Yeah, I agree. It feels great when we can turn a predicted loss into a win by just pulling all those strings on the alliance and making sure everyone's playing at the peak performance to close the points.
And can I ask a quick question? Sorry, about what you were talking about having two programming teams. Yeah. So, do you have separate mentors mentoring
Yes.
programming team?
Yeah, so I think you've met William before.
Okay.
So he's the lead mentor for the app programming one.
And then you have separate mentors.
Separate, and then currently Alex is our lead mentor for programming for robot code.
Typically, we have separate mentors, and then also the students. We have kind of different requirements in terms of programming abilities to kind of get into one together, and we find that the strategy programming, since we also are using Java as well and all that, it's a great intro into programming where people can kind of learn, develop their skills, and then move into robot programming. It's a good fit. So it's a good transition for us. I think you had a hand up.
It was the same, Sean. I think when the scout group can see how the data was used, that was the year that they really started understanding what was it.
Being able to take that team like Chaos Theory at District Champs,
That was such
or
a
who was our second pick at Lake O, that was ranked so low that they thought they were going home, and then we go on to win the event because of the data that was there to back up making that pick, even though that their ranking didn't show it.
Yeah, it definitely feels different.
Yeah, I have another question related to this, which is, you guys clearly have some significant infrastructure in place for getting defense data. And I was curious kind of what metrics you track and how it works from a scouter perspective.
Go for it, John.
So the biggest thing, at least from a pitch strategy perspective, talking to teams, the biggest thing is number one, how much driver experience have you had? Number two, how much practice have you had playing defense? Because let's say this year there is very low visibility, so the amount of practice you have. Number three, the pushing power. So going over the different drive traits of the robot, we have different classifications. We ask what the wheels are, what the sims are, and then gauge it on its own level. Like a 2-sim high traction wheel drive is less efficient than like a 6 Neo Coulson wheel drive. So you kind of know which robot would win in a pushing match. Going over to the previous experience playing defense at different events, going into have they played defense at that event at all, tracking, I believe we have some stuff on the app of like, have they played defense by seeing, because this year only one robot was allowed on the other side of the field, so we were tracking how long was that opponent on the other side of the field. You
We had
press
a
and
time
hold the
we
button.
did that. Yeah, on
Yeah.
defense.
So it's really just their experience in defense as well as the capabilities of the robot to win out against other defense robots.
And then we also try to supplement it a little bit, because again, it's one of the really hard things to scout. Oftentimes, you have your dedicated tablet scouters in the stands that are watching a single robot in that match. We'll also have usually either a few other students, mentors, or if we're lucky, we get a parent that's really interested. That will just take physical notes, and that's all they're looking for is defense ability or driver ability on those robots. And they're well-trained people that are really interested in strategy and scouting. We value their opinion, and they're taking detailed notes on that robot's ability to play defense. And oftentimes we'll take those into account when we're discussing maybe how we weight or what the hard data we're getting on those defense bots, because we like to rely on hard data, because you take the human element out, but sometimes you just need a subjective opinion on how that person's driving is, like how field aware they are, right? Like they're playing defense on this bot, but this bot isn't scoring any points. It's not effective defense. They really should be over there on this other one, right? And that's something that you can't necessarily track with hard numbers or timing elements, and you need that subjective viewpoint.
And one more thing with pre-scouting. So on our pre-scouting slideshow page, you didn't see next to it, but next to the notes column, we have a specific notes column for defense notes. So we write in, because if you've seen a robot play defense, you really, after you see enough robots play defense, you get a sense for, is this robot wasting time playing defense in this certain area? Should this robot be somewhere else? What's the most effective? If it's also playing defense on a specific team, like at Worlds this year, we saw Viking Robotics completely shut down 179, and we said they only play defense once, but they shut down a team who's really hard to shut down. Therefore, we rate their defense much higher than
Yeah, defense is tricky because, like I said, it's a mixture of, there's not much hard data to go off of. It's very subjective. We are blessed to have a relatively large team with 35 kids average, and with the mentors and stuff that are interested, and we try to set the rule of we keep everybody busy at competition. There is no one idle at competition, and to achieve that, we've in a lot of ways created other roles in other groups.
That's true.
Lots of different groups that are tracking different things or taking different observations, and it's been really, really helpful for us. But yeah, we have we have the hard data collection in the stands, and then we have the soft data collection in the stands. And some of them are looking specifically for strategies. Some of them are looking specifically for defense or driver ability, like how quick were they to react to something that was changed. So they're catching all of the net that's catching everything else that doesn't get caught everywhere else in the system.
I would say we didn't start out with that, all these things. As you grow as a team, you're going to be able to pull more resources and dedicate students or mentors or parents or whoever is dedicated to fill those tiny roles. And it's just every year at the end of the year, we do like a plus delta, right? We look back and we're like, how do we make this better? And then we make those our goals for that next coming year, whether it's the strategy team or, just mechanical robot stuff. But we always try and do that in every group on our team, and I think that's why we've always consistently grown. And
It's been a decade of focus and investment
Yeah.
and small improvements year to year.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that what we did this year was like really great, because honestly, we struggled with every single defense pick. But we basically, in our app, for each student who's tracking one robot, they're able to rate the driver quality at the end, and also mention if they played in a match.
Yeah.
And it just helped a little bit to have some numbers to compare, but I'm not gonna say that they really informed us to the level that we wanted.
Yeah, one thing that it's always tricky too is, which we've had issues with in the past, is training scouters so that you have a common reference across scouters. Especially if you're implementing some system that you have to give someone a rating, say 1 through 5.
Yeah.
One person's perspective of a 5 might be very different from someone else's perspective of a 5. So it's important to spend time all together as a scouter and look through matches and make sure you're all on the same page in terms of how do we have this. Otherwise, that increment might really throw off your data at the end. We typically, for week 0, get together to both do a big test of our scouting system as well as a thorough training of our scouting group to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everything is working.
If you do have a smaller team and you can only maybe have one person looking at scouting or something like that, or teaching the strategies at all, if you only have one person doing that, what strategies should you focus on? What should that person mainly be doing with the time that they have?
That's a great question. Who wants to take this one to start? Sean? He's like waiting for this one.
So it fully depends on the effort that person wants to put in and the time that they have. That person, from experience that I know, they can completely burn themselves out trying to think of all the possible strategies, trying to watch every single team. But in terms of what they can do, if they don't really have too much of a focus on strategy, they're not really too into it, kind of the best you can do is stay informed about what the goings on of the teams and the matches and kind of a general idea of what the strategy can do. To the most energetic person watches matches with fun, keeps track of the robots, and it's fun for them. So you understand a robot, you keep track of it, you have a general image of the robots at your next event. You do whatever you can to prepare for that event, so that when you get to that event, all the culmination of everything you've been thinking about with those teams gets put into action. You actually have a plan for that. Even one person can make a big difference. It just really depends on their effort.
And let me just interject further. I would also emphasize, know your own robot really well too, because if you're going to be the sole strategy person for that team, not only learning about other robots so that you can kind of form an opinion on how you want to play the strategy, but how to know how those robots will mesh well with your robot. Because you're going to go into an alliance, you're going to have a match together, and they're going to be like, so what did your robot do? And if you're confident and you have great knowledge about what you guys are capable of doing, that's amazing. That's going to take you really far too. So not only know your robot, but just utilize what little resources you have to kind of gain as much knowledge. Free scouting, one of the easiest things you can do, because you can do that on your own time.
I was going to say that my recommendation would be, if you have the time for it, do as much before the competition as possible. Because that pre-scouting is tremendously helpful. Even if robots show up and they're slightly altered their design, you're still going to have some foundation to say, look, we're going into this next match, this is what we should do. And sometimes, it's as simple as, this is their strongest robot, we need to make sure to shut them down. And that is already huge to go into a match knowing. So besides, doing as much as you can beforehand. And the thing too is that even if you're the only strategy person, say for example, during the event, before the event, you might be able to get other people to also help do that pre-scout collection. We do have a fair amount of students on our team that do that. Even though that at competition, they might be doing pit or other sort of stuff.
And pre-scouting is like watching previous matches or just getting data.
Yeah. And some good tips for that is you can go to the blue lines and figure out where different events were streamed. Not everything ends up on YouTube, but
Unfortunately,
a lot of it ends up on Twitch.
yeah.
So you can go to Twitch, you can see what channel streamed it, and then kind of find out and go to the recordings and then pull up that event. Easier said than done, especially if you're talking like international teams for Worlds. It gets kind of hard to find some of it, but yeah, you can find a lot of stuff online you can go back and watch.
For sure. I think another thing that an individual person can do to bring a lot of value is communicate with the other teams at the event. Essentially, if your robot has an issue, especially later on in the event, you're going to want to communicate with the pit crew or the drive team, what happened, what are we doing to fix it, is it going to be ready for our next match, and then all the pertinent parties might want to know about that, which is going to include your alliance partners in your upcoming matches, any robots you might be selling yourselves to, or you might be thinking about picking if you're in a picking position, get that information out. I also think that it could potentially be valuable for that person to try and make connections with other teams, just personal connections with the other scouting people on those teams, so that in future events you can try to negotiate some sort of scouting alliance so that you can share data, or even if you end up in a picking position, essentially try to make the first pick, go with the robot that's going to be good on your alliance, and maybe a team that has some good scouting data, so that can help inform your second round pick. And you know, if you aren't in a picking position, maybe you try to sell yourself to a team that has good scouting data, so together you can make a good alliance. And I don't know, selling yourself to teams, it definitely has varying degrees of effect on what actually happens in these scouting meetings where lists are made. But I think that if you reach out and make a positive connection with the team, especially if you have a match with them in the qualifications and you basically ask what you can do and make arrangements within your team in order to make those things happen, it can definitely increase your odds. I remember, this is just an example, but in 2012, at Worlds, there was this incredible team, 17-17, that was on our field, and we had a match with them. And essentially, we didn't have any programmers there, we hardly had any scouts there. But we sent a couple of people to just talk to them, be like, hey, for our match in a few hours, what should we do? And they were like, you can write a little autonomous mode that feeds us your preloaded game pieces. And so we did that, and it worked, and then they picked us later on. So, just an example.
Yeah, with one person, I think it's hard to try to do data collection for picking by yourself. That's very difficult to watch all the matches and try to figure out, like, if you're in a picking position, who to pick next. I love the idea, you know, you're saying about, you know, try to potentially find someone with data, or, you know, the night before, if you find yourself in the top 8, maybe go and watch some matches and try to figure out who you're going to pick. You're at best going to get a rough list, and I think at that point that's totally you know, I agree that with one person, then yeah, being kind of the representative in terms of strategy, to plan ahead matches, trying to figure things out, be the communication interface representation for the team is a very big thing.
Who is first? We'll start with you and then we'll come back to you. Okay.
So in pre-scout or maybe let's take into consideration the history or past performance of the team beyond the season.
Yes, we do. We didn't used to, but now we do.
We actually had this 2 years ago.
2 years ago. 2 years ago.
Where our plus delta was very much we need to have this information because we essentially got to a point where teams, essentially the team we picked was like, wow, I've never done this before, or even captains. That feeds into our list of, or our factors for do we say yes or no. is, do they have experience being a captain? Because being a captain, there's a lot of rules there you have to understand in terms of the timeout, like the swap, the replacement bot, right? So it kind of helps to know the background of teams before you make your decision.
Because it can be,
Let's not say yes or no, but be prepared for when you are playing with them, you know what you need to do.
yeah, it
Correct.
can be
Yeah.
stressful being, you're the first pick for that alliance and that the one that picked you has never done it before. Now that responsibility falls on you to educate them. And that can be stressful should someone break. There's a lot going on depending on the game, matches and stuff like that. So it's something you need to consider if you're gonna say yes or no to them. So keeping definitely track and history of a team's development through the years is something else you need to consider when you're having a pick list. Yeah.
Even even if you're going through the Blue Alliance, an easy thing to do is go through a Blue Alliance and see how has this team done so far this season. Have they been in a position where they were captain? And you can go back even through the Blue Alliance and see historically what they've done over the last couple of years, so they get a good feel for where they usually are.
And back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, so during the competition, how accurate would you say pit scouting is, like going up with your sheet of questions and talking to them about, like, how accurate would you say the information you get from pit scouting is?
So I'm going to briefly talk about it. So it kind of depends on how big your pit strategy team is and how you can ask all the questions you want. And I will say that a lot of teams fudge what they tell you because they want to impress you, and that's fine. And that's why we emphasize in the thing: don't lie, but sell your strengths. Right? Don't make the worst part of your robot the first thing you talk about. Talk about what you do best at when you're selling yourself to other teams, when teams are coming to interview. So that it's gracious professionalism. It's important. It's really frustrating when you have a dedicated or a small limited team to go and ask these teams questions and they're not being honest with you. So the best way if you've got a larger team, you can always verify that data, right? Because you've got people in the stands to actually watch their matches and confirm what they told you in the pit to what they can actually perform on the field. So it can be difficult. I know Sean will probably have some points on this. We've run into it before where you go up to a team and you're like, all right, what are you capable of doing? And they vastly skew what they're capable of. And you go into a match with them and they don't deliver. Like I said, lying in the end will bite you because that team was going to remember what you told them and that you didn't deliver. Unless you have a good reason why, like maybe you broke and there's a legitimate reason you weren't performing, you need to tell them that too. So honesty is always key, gracious and professional. Whether you're the one talking to the team that's being that's coming to scout you, or you're the one doing the scouting, always be very candid. And it's okay if they're just a defense bot. You need to be confident for them too, so that they maintain that honesty. Because if you go in and you're like, oh, it's just a defense bot, I don't need to scout them. Like, that's just gonna iterate that kind of bad culture, and then they're gonna be more likely to maybe not tell you the truth next time. So me and Sean are always really like, I don't know, I feel like we're kind of cheerleaders sometimes for some of the rookie teams, where we come in and they're like, look, our drag screen's not working, something's happened, it broke, and we're like, don't worry about it, we can get this fixed. Do you need help? We can send some resources your way. And then let's utilize what you're capable of doing now in this next match to make sure that we can win and everyone has a good time and that's fun. That's kind of how we approach that.
So one thing I'd like to say about that is pre-scouting helps with that a lot. So like looking at what a team can do beforehand, like if they say we've improved something and this is what we can do now, if it might match up to what their data says and their improvement makes sense, you can kind of relate the information that way. Or even I've tried to gather as much information as I can about the game before the event. So like our first event and this team's first event, they said they could do 12 gears from 2017. But I knew the top 1% teams like 254 were doing 8 to 10 gears. So I kind of took what they said with a little bit of salt and kind of rationalized what maybe.
What are your guys'
I think we rely on it pretty little.
Yeah. I think this kind of goes back to the very first question, where really there's a lot of questions that you just don't need to ask in a bit because you're going to get the answer otherwise. And typically things that are like how much, like you're going to get an answer that's inflated. Like how many years can you do? yeah, we can do 10 gears every match. But, you know, if it's like, can you do this? Are you comfortable doing this? Do you do this regularly? You're going to get a lot more realistic answers because people will be like, yeah, we can kind of do that. Like, it's just easier to be specific.
And I think your strategy team in the pre-match strategy sessions can kind of gain whatever value the pit scout can grab just in the conversation before the match. I mean, it is kind of nice knowing before you have that conversation the direction that conversation is likely to go, which can be informed by the pit scouting, but we don't
even do that much.
maybe to settle tiebreakers again
Disputes, yeah.
at the Friday night session sometimes be useful.
And I wanted to go back a little bit to the previous question about robots' history and team's history. And that's another thing that in the bubble sort, after we use hard data, we might make an adjustment to the rankings on our list. Essentially, if we know, okay, this team, every time when they go into playoffs, they start driving better. Like, or their coach just all of a sudden knows what they're doing, whatever. Like, they find another gear. Some teams find another gear in the playoffs, and some teams freak out in the playoffs and perform at half their qualification performance. And that's an important thing to know. Just because you know that that can change at any moment, we don't assign a huge value to it, but there will be a little shuffling that happens from it. And it's a similar thing that can happen from the discussion day.
Now I get to one of my juicy questions. All right, I want to broach this question to the whole panel. What do you guys look for in a third pick, regardless of the game?
So, first off, a fun one. Good bumpers. You look for high quality bumpers because that honestly makes a huge difference. It tells you a lot about a team. A team that has really nice bumpers had the resources and paid attention to that detail of their robot tells you that probably there's lots of other little details about the robot that they also pay attention to. It's also just really critical. Like, you go into playoffs, and usually the style of play gets a lot rougher. And sometimes bumpers that held on fine during quals are going to rip off because they got hit a little harder and they were at the brink of destruction anyway. So anyway, that's just kind of a fun one that we look for. Like you guys have mentioned before, team organization, how easy to work with they are in the quals. And then just from a strategy perspective, going back to the decisions teams make at the beginning of the season, there are some types of actions that are limited availability and limited time, and they're often really high scoring, like doing the scale, like doing the rocket. And there are other types of robot actions that can basically be tacked on top that can add score to your alliance without taking away an opportunity from another robot, like climbing to level 2, like climbing down from level 2 in Sandstorm, like playing defense. You know, there are things that are parallel tasks and things that are serious tasks, and you want to find a third pick that can succeed in the parallel tasks so that the first and second pick can be more free to do what they normally do.
So I think that Bryce touched on what we look at. I do just reliability.
Yeah.
That's where the bumpers come from. But just a well-built robot that has performed in every match. I mean, looking at the amount of matches robots have dead is also something that might impact the decision.
Yeah, obviously it's a lot more than bumpers when you get down to it, right? A good set of bumpers on a bad set of electricals isn't going to be very well. So you just never know.
Yeah, you'd be amazed how reliability factors high in all this.
Oh, yeah.
If there's a robot that is missing matches due to breakage or is clearly breaking during matches, even for a third pick, it becomes a very dangerous pick. Because if they're going in, it's either because we're trying a multi-strategy sort of thing where we have different configurations for different strategies, or they're coming in to stand in for someone else. There was years that we picked the third robot as a, not even as a scoring backup, but just as a pure defense backup, because we knew that that robot was going to be destroyed. I hate saying that, but that's just the nature of the game out here. And so reliability in a lot of cases becomes really, really high in our sorting.
I'm gonna say more liability. Like, if the team has broken a rule, like if you've ever violated a rule and gotten a penalty, or if you've ever gotten like close to violating a rule either, or the see and it's a call but they didn't call it that one time, violations of rules add up to penalties. Penalties decide matches. Like,
Especially in playoffs, yeah.
if you've like violated a rule and you've been warned and you do it again, like unless you've got like a really good reason and a really convincing reason, like it's scary to pick you as a teammate because those fouls add up fast. Like we're talking about point margins like 1 to 2 points. And with a foul of 3 points or 5 points, that changes the match 180.
Especially that huge game with the crossing the line with the defense spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big one.
And you're absolutely right. We don't actually track just fouls that actually got counted. If a robot is playing really close to the edge of getting fouled and consistently keeps doing this, we have that in our notes too. Because at eliminations, historically, refs sometimes will call things more aggressively than during qualification matches, and that thing that was borderline illegal now becomes very legal.
We know we have 5 minutes left. Any last minute questions from the audience? Or what?
No more minutes
Oh,
left.
sorry, my watch is off. Okay.
All right, guys.
Thank you.